This dining room is for members in good standing, sir. I'd suggest you find somewhere more appropriate. Darlene Moss said it the way people say things when they have already made up their minds. Not loud enough to cause a scene, but loud enough to carry. Several people near the entrance of Harrington House turned to look. Miles Harrington kept his face still. He had not told anyone at the club that he was coming. He had not phoned ahead, had not asked his assistant to send a note, had not done anything that would give Leonard Price time to straighten the lobby, brief the staff, and arrange one of those careful performances that looked exactly like everything was fine. For 18 months, that was precisely what Miles had been receiving from Leonard. Quarterly reports with no friction in them, satisfaction scores that never dipped, complaint logs that came back blank. In a club this size, with this many members and this many employees, blank complaint logs were not a sign of excellence. They were a sign that someone was choosing what to forward and what to delete. So Miles had driven down from his house in the annex on a Thursday afternoon in late October, wearing the same gray fleece he'd put on when he dropped Ellie at her skating lesson, his travel bag older than some of the staff working the front desk. He had reserved a table under the name Miles Cole. He had not counted on Darlene stopping him before he even reached the dining room entrance. He could have said something right then. He could have pulled out his phone and shown her the photograph that hung in every boardroom in the building. The one taken the night Harrington House opened, 6 years ago, when Anna had stood beside him beneath the chandelier and told him she wanted this to be a place where anyone who walked through the door felt like they belonged. Instead, he looked down at his daughter. Ellie Harrington was 9 years old and had Anna's way of going very quiet when she was trying to understand something. She stood beside Miles in her skating clothes, navy leggings, a pale green jacket with a small Canadian flag patch on the holding his hand with both of hers and watching Darlene with careful gray eyes. Miles decided to wait. He needed to see how far it went. For 3 months, letters had been arriving at his head office from longtime members, a retired school teacher who said she had been turned away from her usual table, a young family who had driven from Guelph only to find the club had no record of their booking, an elderly man who wrote that he had been seated near the service door on what would have been his wedding anniversary. Miles had wanted to believe these were isolated incidents. He had driven here today hoping a single visit would show him something that could be resolved with a conversation. He understood now it would take more than that. "We have a reservation," Miles said. 2 guests, 7 o'clock under Cole. Darlene looked at her screen without urgency. "I don't see anything under that name." Miles took out his phone and showed her the confirmation. She studied it, then set her jaw. "There may have been an error on the system side. Unfortunately, all tables have been allocated for this evening." Miles glanced past her. 4 tables near the windows sat empty, candles lit, place settings undisturbed. "Those tables are empty. They're being held." "For whom?" Darlene's gaze moved briefly to his fleece, then to Ellie's skating leggings. "For members who've confirmed their attendance tonight." "I've confirmed mine." "Sir." Her voice dropped into the register people use when they want to appear helpful while being the opposite. "This isn't really the right setting for a casual drop-in. Perhaps try again another evening." Ellie leaned close to Miles and whispered, "Did they lose our reservation, Dad?" Miles looked at the empty tables, at the candles burning for no one. He squeezed Ellie's hand and guided her gently to the seating area near the north window. "Not exactly," he said. They waited. Miles watched. An older man arrived at the front desk carrying a paper bag and a reservation slip. He gave his name, Norman Blythe, in an unhurried, polite voice, and mentioned that he had a standing reservation for the first Thursday of each month, the same reservation he had held for 4 years. The receptionist typed, frowned, and told him the standing reservation had been restructured and his booking was no longer in the system. Norman went still. "My wife set up that reservation before she passed. I've been coming every month since." "I understand. You're welcome to try again next month. Tonight is the anniversary of the day we first came here together." "I'm sorry for your loss, sir. There's nothing I can do." Norman was directed to the same waiting area where Miles and Ellie sat. He settled into the chair across from them and set the paper bag on his knee. Inside, Miles noticed, was a small photograph in a thin wooden frame. Miles introduced himself as Miles Cole. Norman shook his hand with the careful courtesy of a man who had long since decided that politeness cost nothing. He explained that his wife, Ruth, had been the one who discovered Harrington House. She had read about the opening in a magazine and decided they would celebrate their anniversary there. They had done so every year after that. Even after Ruth was gone, Norman had kept coming because it made him feel she was still, in some small way, present. "Has this happened before?" Miles asked. Norman hesitated. "My table has been given away twice. I've seen similar things happen to others. People complain, but the complaints seem to disappear. After a while, they stop coming back." Miles watched a group of 4 being seated near the window without a reservation. A bottle of something expensive arrived within minutes. Everything tightened in his chest, not from surprise, but from the particular grief of seeing something you built become something you no longer recognize. He had trusted Leonard Price because Leonard was efficient and had never arrived unprepared. What Miles had not considered carefully enough was that a man who excelled at managing appearances was not necessarily the same as a man who cared about what lay beneath them. The evening might have continued that way, Miles observing, cataloging the distance between the reports and the reality, except that a sound cut through the dining room that did not belong in a place like this. A glass struck the floor, then a woman's voice, sharp with fear, "Someone help her, she can't breathe." The table was near the south wall. An elderly woman had been dining with her daughter, and now her face had gone pale in the way that happens quickly and without announcement, and she was pressing one hand flat against the tablecloth, trying to stay upright. Her daughter had knocked over her water glass and was calling for staff with the specific desperation of someone who has realized that calling for staff is not working fast enough. Servers hovered at a distance. One spoke quietly into a radio. Another walked briskly toward the management office. No one moved toward the woman. Darlene arrived first and looked at the scene with an expression that seemed primarily concerned about the other diners. "Ma'am, if you could lower your voice." "She's having a reaction. She has a heart condition. I told the kitchen when we made the booking." The daughter's voice broke. "I told them twice. There may have been a miscommunication with the kitchen team. She needs help right now." Miles crossed the room before the sentence finished. "Call 911, he said, not to Darlene, but to the nearest server directly with the kind of clarity that makes people move without deciding to. The server reached for his phone. Miles crouched beside the woman and spoke calmly to her daughter. "Does she take nitroglycerin?" "Yes, it should be in her purse." "Find it. If it's not there, there is a first aid cabinet in this building. North Service corridor behind the brass panel to the left of linen storage. Third shelf." Darlene stared at him. "Guests aren't permitted in the service corridors." "Then send someone who is now." Kezia Ewan, a junior floor supervisor who had been watching from near the service door since the moment the glass fell, was already moving. She had noticed Miles and Ellie from the moment they arrived, had brought them water earlier in the evening and been told by Darlene to stop attending to guests who hadn't asked for service. She had kept watching anyway, the way people do when something doesn't sit right. She found the first aid kit exactly where Miles had described. When she came back, the daughter had located the nitroglycerin. Miles helped administer it, kept the woman still and upright, and spoke quietly to the daughter in a tone meant to keep her focused rather than frightened. When the paramedics arrived, he directed them through the freight entrance on the north side of the building. Leonard Price appeared in the dining room entrance once the paramedics had taken over. He was wearing a dark gray suit and the expression of a man calculating how much of a situation can still be managed, after most of it has already gone wrong. He had not come out during the emergency. He came out now that it was over. "Mr. Cole," he said, approaching with his hand extended, "I want to apologize for the disruption this evening. We're reviewing what happened with the kitchen team." "The kitchen received a medical notation at the time of booking," Miles said. "It was not passed forward." Leonard's jaw tightened slightly. "These things occasionally fall through." "Kezia." Miles looked at her. "Was the notation in the system this afternoon?" Kezia stood very still. She had been afraid of this moment for months, the moment when someone asked her to say out loud what she had only allowed herself to think. She looked at Leonard. His expression was not quite a warning, but it was not nothing. Then she looked at Ellie, who had come quietly to stand at her father's side. Something settled in Kezia. "Yes," she said, "it was in the system. I flagged it during afternoon prep. I was told that dietary notes slow down service and should only be raised if the guest brings it up first." The dining room went quiet in the way that happens when something true is finally said in a place where truth has been carefully managed out. Leonard began to speak. Miles stopped him. "She is not finished." Kezia looked around at the staff who had been silent for months. This is not the first time a notation was ignored. 2 previous incidents were documented internally. Both were removed from the records before quarterly submissions. Leonard turned to her with the expression of a man about to end a career. You're emotional after a difficult situation. Go home before. She stays, Miles said. Leonard looked at him the way people look at strangers who have entered a conversation that isn't theirs. I don't know who you think you are. I know who I am, Miles said. The question is how certain you are that you don't. He made a phone call. It lasted under a minute. 4 minutes later, the service elevator opened. Audrey Sang, Senior Legal and Compliance Officer of Harrington Group, walked across the lobby with 2 members of the corporate review team. Every veteran employee in the room recognized her from company-wide meetings. She stopped in front of Miles and said, Mr. Harrington, the reservation logs, complaint records, kitchen notation files, and billing irregularities have all been preserved as requested. The sound Darlene made was not quite a gasp. Norman Blythe looked up from the chair where he had been sitting quietly with Ruth's photograph on his knee. He looked at Miles, then at the name on the brass sign above the entrance, and understood. Ellie, who had followed the entire evening with her careful, quiet attention, looked up at her father. That's your name up there, she said. Yes, Miles said. Is that why you knew where the medicine cabinet was? I helped design the building. Ellie considered this. Why didn't you just tell them at the beginning? Miles looked at Leonard, who had stopped attempting to look composed. Because I needed to see what happened when they believed no one important was watching. Audrey read from the preliminary findings without allowing interruption. Reservation records altered to favor members assessed as high spending. Dietary and medical notifications symptomatically deprioritized. Complaint logs reviewed and selectively deleted before quarterly submission to headquarters. Staff members who raised concerns had shifts reduced or were reassigned to less favorable positions. Management bonuses had increased in the same period that member service had declined. Most seriously, 2 prior incidents involving medical notifications had been identified, documented briefly, and then removed from the file before board disclosure. Leonard's employment ended that evening. So did Darlene's. The supervisors connected to the altered records were suspended pending a full review. Miles made clear that accountability was not the same as wholesale punishment. There were staff members who had participated willingly in what the system had become. There were others who had stayed silent because they were afraid. Those were not the same thing, and he would not treat them as though they were. He turned to Kezia. Her promotion to floor manager was effective immediately. The shifts that had been taken from her would be restored and her lost income repaid. Kezia tried to speak. Miles told her that doing the right thing did not always look like courage in the moment. Sometimes it just looked like telling the truth when someone finally asked. He found Norman still seated near the north window, preparing to leave with Ruth's photograph held carefully against his chest. Miles sat across from him and apologized. Not as a business owner managing a situation, but as a man who understood what it meant to return somewhere because someone you had loved it first, and to be turned away at the door. He invited Norman to have dinner. Norman accepted. They sat at the corner table near the window, the one with the longest view of the October Street below. Ellie sat between them. Norman placed Ruth's photograph beside the candle. Miles took a photograph of Anna from his wallet and set it next to Ruth's. For a while, no one spoke. The rain moved in long lines down the glass, and the room was warm, and the food, when it arrived, was brought by staff who had rediscovered why they had taken the job in the first place. Ellie looked around the room after a while and asked the question that caught Miles without a prepared answer. Why were they being mean before and nice now? Miles looked at her, then at the window, then at the 2 photographs standing side by side in the candlelight. Some people think kindness is a reward, he said. Something you give to people who have already proven they deserve it. They're wrong about that. Kindness isn't something you earn. It's something you're owed just by walking in the door. Ellie thought about this. Mom was like that. She was, Miles said. She believed it more clearly than anyone I've known. Norman told them about the first time he and Ruth had come to Harrington House. How she had dressed up and laughed at herself for doing so. How she had said that every person deserved one beautiful evening simply because they were alive and the evening was there to be had. Miles listened and recognized the thought because Anna had said something almost identical, standing in this same room, on the night before the building opened. He had stepped away after she died. He had trusted the numbers and the quarterly summaries and told himself that distance was a form of perspective. It was not. Values left without anyone to tend them did not stay unchanged. They became something else, slowly and without announcement, until the only way to know what they had become was to walk through the front door as if for the first time. In the months that followed, Miles rebuilt the standards of Harrington House from the floor up. Complaint channels were made independent of management. Medical and dietary notifications were built into a mandatory pre-service confirmation. Kezia's first act as floor manager was to post the revised protocols where every staff member could read them. Miles also had a small addition made to the corner table near the window, the one with the longest view of the street below. A modest plaque, nothing ornate, reserved for anyone who comes here to remember someone they loved. Norman came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after. He always brought Ruth's photograph and always greeted whoever seated him with the particular warmth of a man who has decided that the people around him deserve his best attention regardless of anything else. One evening near the end of that year, Ellie stood with Miles at the entrance to the dining room and watched the room settle into its evening rhythm. The quiet movement of staff who had learned that a guest's dignity was not optional. The candlelight steady on occupied tables, the window holding the long, dark view of the city. Ellie looked up at the name above the door. "You're responsible for all of this," she said. Miles watched Kezia cross the room to greet a tired-looking man in a work jacket who had stopped just inside the entrance, unsure whether he belonged somewhere this warm and well-lit. Watched her smile and lead him to a table near the window without hesitation, without a glance at his coat. "Yes," Miles said, "I am."